Hi, it's Rob from Innon here, and in this video I'm going to show you how to get data from your LoRaWAN sensors, your Milesight LoRaWAN sensors, into your Niagara 4 stations. So before we get started, let's talk about some prerequisites. Now what you need for this is a Niagara 4 station version 4.9 or above running in your Jace or on your web supervisor. You need to license from Innon a set of modules, the HTTP API module and the JSON kit modules are specific ones we've developed. Okay, you need a LoRaWAN sensor, a Milesight LoRaWAN sensor, and you need a Milesight LoRaWAN gateway, the UG65. So if you've got all that together, we're ready to go. So let's go over to the bench and let's look at setting up the hardware first. First of all, you need to connect the aerial. Then you need to connect the power supply inside here. You can route it through here. Then you need to connect the Ethernet patch cable to the UG65 first. Then plug the other end of the Ethernet patch cable into your switch. You then need to apply power to the UG65, then the switch, and you wait a short while and you should see the power, status and Ethernet LEDs come up. If that's all going, we're good to go and we can go to the next stage. Okay, so the first thing we need to do is a little bit of preparation work on our Niagara platform and station. So if we open up the platform first, and then we go in and have a look at the licensing part in the license manager. Now what we need to do here is update the license. I'm in a Jace here. Okay, so just let it, it's going to be a little bit slow. So you can see I've already got this thing called Innon Energy license. This is the one that will license the HTTP and the IoT, the JSON components or modules, I should say, that we need to get Milesight to work. If you haven't, obviously, when you first do this, you're going to create license for this platform. You need to come into here, do import, and then you've got two choices there. You'll either be able to import from files that we will email to you that you can copy onto your laptop, or you can go direct from the license server and update the license there. Okay, so we can see here the two options there. But mine's already licensed, so I'm going to cancel that. So the next thing we need to do now is to add the modules into our workbench before we load them into the Jace. So if you go to Innon support, or support.innon.com I should say. You go down to Innon, and then there's two you need, or you might need. There's the HTTP one there, so you download that one. And then there's the innon.json one there, and you download that one. Now what you now need to do is open up Explorer. You'll see them in your download directory probably. And you want to cut and paste them into your Niagara installation. So it depends which one you're working on. Mine is 4.11. Under there is modules. Now I've already added these in, so I won't add them in again obviously, but this is where what you need to see. You need to paste those two files into there. So once you've added those modules into your Niagara Workbench directory, what you need to do is then restart Workbench so that it reads all the modules that it's got and it will appear to you later on when you're doing the software manager piece in the Jace. I've already done that, so I don't need to restart my Workbench. I'm going to go straight on to the next bit. Okay, so now we've got those modules in Workbench, we now need to go back into our platform of our Jace. This is mine here. And go to the software manager. Now I've already added mine, but I'm just going to show you where you need to look and how to add them. I'm sure you probably know how to do this, but just let me cover this step for anybody who's got any doubts about this. So at the moment it's analysing the files available and it's looking to see what's in my Jace. It will take a little while. So if we go down to the modules, mine are installed, so it won't be shown as installed, but you'll be looking for the two modules, the Innon modules that are not installed. So you can see mine are here. They're already installed, so if they weren't, you need to click on them. Install button would be available here. You'd select them to install. They'd go to install here in blue, and then you'd commit, and then they would get sent down to your Jace. So the next thing we need to do is a little bit of preparation work in our station on our Jace. So let's go into there. Let's go down to services under config. Let's go to our web service. Now, in the way I've got my gateway set up, I'm going to use the insecure HTTP port 80. You might want to use HTTPS, but you need to set things accordingly in here depending on which port you're going to use. The next thing we need to do is add an authentication scheme that doesn't come in the standard JACE. So we go under authentication schemes, we can see the two that come there with the JACE. Now what we need to do is add one from the Baha palette. So you open up the Baha palette, you go down to the bottom, under authentication schemes, web services schemes, and there's one here called HTTP basic schemes. So what we need to do is drag that in to authentication schemes, drop it in there, okay that, and that's that bit done. Right, the next thing we need to do is set up a user specifically for our UG65 LoRaWAN gateway to use. So we're going to user services, just accept that, refresh that. So we create a new user, one user, give it a suitable name. I'm just going to call this LoRaWAN. We need to add the roles to it. Now you need to be careful, make sure you add roles that have got access to wherever you put the servlet module, which we'll do a little bit later. Make sure the role has access to that using your category sheets and roles and things like that, and make sure it maps through correctly. Right, so remember we added the HTTP basic scheme. We need to select that one. Okay, that's the one it needs to use, the UG65 when it comes in. That's what it will be using rather, and we need to be ready for it. So let's put a password in here. You need to make a careful note of this because we obviously need to put that into the UG65 for it to use to get into the JACE's web service. So we OK that, and our user is added. So the next thing we need to do in readiness for the UG65 to send data is add a text HTTP servlet somewhere in our station. The best thing to do is to create a new folder for a new wire sheet. I'll call this LoRaWAN, I don't know what it is. We open that up. Now what we need to do is open up the Innon HTTP palette. So we open that up and we see two choices here. We want the text HTTP servlet. We want the JACE to act as a server for the UG65 to access as a client. So we'll drop that in there. You can name that if you like. Let's expose a slot, which is a very important slot, which is a text slot. This is the data coming in from, or will be coming in from the LoRaWAN gateway. So we can see that when it arrives on the wire sheet. Now if we double click into there, there's a very important slot here called servlet name. Now I'm going to call that LoRaWAN. Okay. Actually, I'll call that LoRaWAN 2. I think someone's actually added one here already, so I'll make sure that's a different one. Make a note of that because that is going to form what's called the URL that we're going to have to put into our LoRaWAN gateway to make sure the data comes into the right part of the web service in the JACE. So we save that and we're ready to go. So yes, that concludes all the preparation work inside the JACE. Now it's time to go over to the UG65 gateway web interface and start doing some configuration there. So now we need to connect to the LoRaWAN gateway web user interface or web interface. Now when it comes out of the factory, the address will be set to 192.168.23.1 and in the manual it will tell you that is the address and how to change it. Ours has already been set up, so I'm going to skip that step, but I will show you where to change that in the UG65. Okay, so the default username and login is admin lowercase for username and password lowercase for password. Okay, now when it's factory fresh, it will take you through a little setup sequence. What it will do is it will take you through to the user management and it will ask you to change the password there, which is good practice. You should change that. And the other thing it will ask you to do is to go to the packet forwarder and set up the antenna type. If you remember, we're using the external antenna, so it will ask you to select whichever you want to set up there. So like I say, I've already set up the IP address to suit our office for our demo, but what you then need to do is go to network, go to interface, and here you need to set up your IP and subnet, default router or gateway, primary DNS server, and all those kind of things to make it work with your particular IP system. Once you've done that, you'll then need to obviously go back to your laptop and set its address back to how you started to suit the site or the place that you're working to be able to communicate with the Milesight router. So once you've set all that up, there's some little bits of preparation work you need to do first. So we need to go to the packet forwarder first. And what we need to do is make sure this embedded NS server is there and it's enabled. So if we click the pencil button, we need to check it's enabled. Server address is set to localhost. We don't need to worry about the MQTT port. We just leave that as is and save it. Mine's already set up. The next thing we need to check is the network server. So we click on network server on the left, and we just need to make sure that is set to enable and save that if necessary. So that's the preparation work done on the gateway. Now we need to start adding our LoRaWAN sensors. So the way to do that is like a 3-step method, and it's done in a logical order, and all you have to do is follow these tabs at the top here when you're under network server. So we click on applications first. Now there's already one set up for the sensor, but we're going to add a new one anyway. So we add a new application. Now what this is doing is just it's a place to do different bits of decoding and things like that. So you'll typically add one for each type of sensor. So I'm just going to call this one AM300, call it 2 because there's one there already. You just give it a description down here if you like. Now there's a payload codec here. We're going to set that to custom. We're going to come back and set some things up here a little bit later. But for now, we're just going to save that. So there you are. There's my new application down the bottom there. So we take the next step, which is to the right, which is profile. So you see we're going left to right in a logical order. Now we need to set up a profile. This is just the way that the LoRaWAN sensors talk to the LoRaWAN gateway. We've already got one set up here, but I'm just going to choose another one. I'm just going to call it generic A2. So we just leave all the settings the same here. Now this will work with all Milesight LoRaWAN sensors, and it will work with endless sensors as well. Class type is class A. We leave that checked. We keep advanced unchecked, and we save that. And there's our new one at the top of the list. Now we've prepared our applications and profiles, we need to add a device. This is going to be a specific LoRaWAN device that is out on our network transmitting LoRaWAN data. So if we do add at the top there, so the first thing we need to do is give it a name. So I'm going to call this one AM300 office, because it's the one in our office. Description there, if that helps you out at all. Now the EUI is what you would have noted before from the box. You could have used the QR code to use the Milesight LoRaWAN, the Milesight IoT application on your phone. It would have read it for you. I've taken a note of mine. So if I copy that number there that I took a note of, and paste it into there. You might have a schedule if you've got like dozens of these things on the floor. So the profile is the new one that I created, and the application, do you remember I created a new one there? I'm going to choose that one. Now the application key is the same for all Milesight LoRaWAN gateways, and it's this basically. So that is in our knowledge base article, I think it's in the manual, but that's always the same for all Milesight sensors. Endless ones, it'll be on the box for you. So we leave the frame counter validation unchecked. All these other fields will populate once the sensor starts communicating with the gateway. I'll save and apply that. So we've added the sensor to our database in our gateway. Now we're waiting here for it to communicate, and when it communicates, it'll this tick will go green for activated, but it might take some time for it to send some data through. Okay, so now we can see a green tick on our new sensor there, so we know it's communicating, and we can carry on to the next part. So the next part, if you remember, when we set the application up, we set this custom codec. Okay, so what we need to do now is paste some Java code into here. Okay, so you don't need to worry about that, because what we've got, if we go into our into the support website, Innon support website, we've got that all ready for you. So you go down to Milesight, application decoders, you check the box that you check the one you want, the AM300. Remember, that's the type of sensor that we're using, and then you download that. Okay. So once that's downloaded, you go into your downloads, and then you open it up. You select it all, you copy it, and then you go back into here and paste it into this payload decoder function. Okay, and we save that and go back into that application. There's a few more things we've got to do. So what we need to do now is add what's called a data transmission. What this is going to do is fire this data we're gathering from the LoRaWAN sensors to the Tritium J station. Okay, so there's two parts to that. One is the credentials to allow the data to get into the station, and the other part is the URL to get to the station and then to that little servlet module which we called LoRaWAN. So it'll be the IP address of the JACE, and then you add on / the servlet name, as you might remember. So the first thing to do is to click the add button, select a type. Now we're using HTTP, if you remember. You could use HTTPS as well. but this is the way that our servlet modules get the data into the JSON station. Once we've selected that, we come down here, we've got the HTTP header. Now if we add one, what this is going to be the credentials to allow this data access into the JSON station. The JSON web server is going to look for a user. If you remember, we set that up as an HTTP user. So the header name has got to be authorization. Now that's the American spelling, you notice, with the Z. Now the header value is going to be basic, then space, so it's spelled exactly as I have with a capital B, then a space. And now what we need to do is go to a website called Base64 Encode that anyone can go to and use. Oh, I've cheated, I've already got that in there. So what we need to do is put in the username, if you remember that HTTP username, which was LoRaWAN, then a colon, and then the password for that username, which is Innon12345. And then we hit the encode button, give it a minute or second, and down here you can see that it's encoded that string that we typed in there into Base64 down here. So we select it all, we copy it, and then we go back to our Milesight web user interface, and then we paste it into that field after the space. Now if we go down here, press the save button, we're ready to go to the next bit. There's one little other piece we've got to do, so hit the pencil button on that data transmission entry we've just made. Now we need to set the uplink data URL. This is basically the JSON and the name of the that server. If you remember that server, it was called LoRaWAN 2, wasn't it? That's what I've set it up as. So we save that, and now we should be seeing data arriving at our JSON. So we'll go and have a look at that now. So let's go back to workbench now and have a look in the config of our JSON. If you remember, I created this little wire sheet and I dropped that servlet into there. As you can see on that text slot, we can see data there already, so it's working, it's linked. The UG65 LoRaWAN gateway is successfully pushing HTTP posts up to our JSON. So what do we need to do now? We need to decode this. This is JSON, we need to decode it and get it into some slots in our Niagara 4 station so we can use it how we like in Niagara 4. In the framework. So to do that, we need to use our Innon JSON palette. So we select that. The first thing we need is a queue. Okay, so we drag the queue in. This is good practice. I say we need it, you don't, but what this will do is deal with the data in an orderly fashion. So if we link that to the JSON queue, we go in there, we can see that it processes it every second and will have a queue size of 1,000. So this is if you get hundreds of messages a second, it will queue them all up and it will go through them one at a time in 1 second intervals or whatever interval you set. It's just a way of throttling the comms and keeping its things steady. So a good thing to do now is to expose the out slot on that queue. So these are the queue time messages coming out after it's processed what's coming in. And what we need to do now is put a JSON router on there. So we drag that one in. Okay, that. Now we link the out slot of the JSON queue to the process JSON of the JSON router. Okay, if we go into this JSON router, this will make it a bit more self-explanatory what it's doing. So we put a key in here. Now what this key is telling you to look for a particular JSON key, and the key we're looking for is dev EUI. So we've decoded the LoRaWAN data, and we've given each device receiver EUI this key value pair, so we can pick them out and divide the different devices up into different slots, and you'll see how that works in a second. So if I OK that, I go back to this slot. Now if we give this a few minutes, when a new message comes in, what it should do is start creating slots on this JSON router. So now you can see the slots are starting to appear, and I recognise that 27791 one at the end is our new one that we've added. So we're getting data coming through. So that's all the data from that one device, and as the other devices update, you can see them coming through as well. You can see how dynamic it is and automated it is, which is quite clever really. So now we need to get the data out of that device, or all of these devices. We'll just do this one. What we need now is a JSON demux, okay? So we add that in, we OK that. Now what we need to do here is add the slot that we need for the device we need. So I recognise that 2779 as our new AM300. And I'll put that into that process JSON action slot there on the JSON demux. Now this will do the similar thing that the JSON router did. It will see as the data updates, it will create slots for each piece of data, and it will be more self-explanatory when it's done that. And there we go, right on time actually it did it. So what we can see here now is the data within that AM300, the CO2, the humidity, the temperature, the pressure, all the bits and pieces of data have been automatically populated in that JSON demux. Now it's in Niagara slots, we can add it to other parts of the station, so it could be a kit control module, for example. We could add a loop point in, and we could expose the CV slot on that, for example. And we could add we could link it to the temperature slot on this JSON data like that, and it could start controlling that loop. We could break it out into numeric writables and things like that, and we could add things like alarm extensions and history extensions, so we could get chart alarms and charts and things like that, just like any other Niagara point. Okay, I hope you found that useful, and if you'd like some more information on this, please head on over to innon.com and go to our support site where you can find user manuals and data sheets, and also have a look at our knowledge base there too, where there's some specific articles on this topic. So I'll see you in the next video.